And we're back again with another video in my 2026 NFL Deep Dive series. It's my number 31 team, the Cleveland Browns. Thanks for coming back. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the future videos, including your team and where your team is ranked. And if your team is the Cleveland Browns, boy, do I apologize for ranking them this low, but just kind of is what it is. Brand new head coach. Shedeur Sanders is still your quarterback. You've added some interesting pieces in the wide receiver room with Denzel Boston, Casey Concepcion. You revamped the offensive line, which I'm going to talk about how I feel they were a little bit maybe of a scapegoat for some just poor performances from Shedeur Sanders, and his marketing team did really well at getting five professional offensive linemen fired from their jobs for maybe his shortcomings. Defending Defensive Player of the Year, Myles Garrett, of course, but no Jim Schwartz. You got Mike Ruttenberg. Just quick rundown. The formula I use, guys, just so you know, early on these videos, formula I used is down in the description of this video, along with the chapters and all that. Quarterbacks, running backs, weapons, offensive line, their run blocking, pass blocking, all players individually graded, and then sort of just combine the grades, average them out in certain ways. You guys see the formula there and how I went about it. And then, rank them against the rest of the league. And this is sort of just how it all worked out for Cleveland. There's a lot of bright spots I really like about this team. But the real question marks come from this coaching staff. And Todd comes over from Baltimore, where he was the offensive coordinator the last couple of years, got a lot out of Lamar Jackson as a passer, and he was really hired under the guise of that. He was super excited about Shedeur Sanders. You saw it in his introduction press conference, and you heard the rumors of him wanting to draft Shedeur on day 3 of the draft with the Ravens. So he really did get the job because they want to see if Shedeur Sanders can be the guy. And he brought over Travis Switzer, who was his run game coordinator in Baltimore just last year. And it's going to be a really balanced game. But the one thing that Todd Monken introduced into Lamar Jackson's game was the vertical pass game. It was about, there was a lot of shotgun, a lot of RPO. It was very shotgun heavy, not a lot of under center. And that creates, you get the stretch runs, you get, the cutback lanes for your running back, Quinshon Judkins. With this combination of Switzer and Monken, I expect the run game to be a huge feature of this team. With Judkins and Dylan Sampson, you even got Raheem Sanders in there, who I think people forget about, the Arkansas running back. So they got a nice little running back room going on there. They want to run stacks with the wide receivers. You'll see them do that a lot. When you got a guy like Judy and Concepcion, who are kind of very similar players, putting them on the same side of the field, getting them stacked, it's going to create some mismatch opportunities for you. Confusing the defensive backs, forcing them to communicate a little bit more, and you're basically forcing them into a mistake, and then it's an easy read for your quarterback. But the one thing, we'll get into Shedeur a little bit later, specifically, but Todd Monken, he did a great job improving Lamar as a passer. Lamar was very, very much a better passer every single year under Todd Monken. His ability to get the ball outside the numbers really improved. There was just some, Lamar just had some decision-making issues, and Todd Monken, as the head coach, basically running the offense. Travis Switzer is, again, the offensive coordinator by title, but I think Switzer will be a lot more coordinating the run game more than anything else. I think Monken's going to be the one working real heavy with Shedeur to help maybe improve that decision-making a little bit, because Shedeur was not without significant struggles last season. And then the one thing he's going to have to really bring over is his ability to work with a defense, right? So he's got Mike Ruttenberg, who, he was the linebackers coach with the Jets for a bit. He was the defensive pass game coordinator last year for Atlanta. I guess he kind of earned his way into a defensive coordinator position, but I don't Their defensive coordinator last year was Jim Schwartz, one of the best defensive coordinators in the entire league. To go from that to this is a significant downgrade. It's probably the most significant downgrade we're going to see across coordinator positions, and that is just horrible for Ruttenberg because now the expectations are so high. He's got great players on that defense to work with, but can he run the defense himself? Can he take that role on, and can Todd Monken create a culture and a game plan as a head coach that's going to set Ruttenberg and that defense up for success? I think they got the depth, they got the pieces. They're going to run some 4-3 multiple, which is going to be able to allow them to use Alex Wright and Isaiah McGuire and Myles Garrett at the same time with Mason Graham and Malik Collins. They got 2 rookies out there now, Logan Fano. They added Quincy Williams at linebacker, who Ruttenberg is very familiar with from his time with the Jets as the linebackers coach. But they're a little weak in the linebacker room in terms of their depth. I thought they could have afforded to get Ruttenberg another linebacker like Sonny Styles or even someone like CJ Allen or Jacob Rodriguez. They were all kind of within firing range for the Browns, and they just decided not to go that direction. I understand the direction they went. It was Todd Monken comes in. It's like, my job's to get Shedeur Sanders ready. So he goes offense. But I think Ruttenberg needed more help than I think people were giving credit for, especially because I think Jim Schwartz did a lot with the guys they had on the roster. Now, they added some really good players in the secondary, like Emmanuel McNeil-Warren. It didn't feel like Ruttenberg was given the pieces that he needed to really round out that defense when there was a real opportunity in this draft for Monken and the GM and all that to add to that group. But it was very obvious that this year for the Browns is about figuring out if Shedeur Sanders is the franchise quarterback or not, with what is expected to be a quality quarterback class coming up. And Monken kind of joins Jeff Hafley, who we covered in the previous video, as a coach who seems relatively safe here in the first year because they're both in the same sort of position where they're trying to figure out if this particular quarterback is going to be the franchise, and if not, they're going to be highly invested in the draft class coming up. Overall, Todd Monken is my 28th ranked head coach. They get a tier 4 for offensive coaching, tier 6 for defensive coaching. That's right at the bottom. And it's not that I don't like Todd Monken. I feel like Todd Monken as a head coach, this is questionable just because of what we saw the Ravens offense do in some key situations. You wonder how much of that's on Monken, how much of that's on Lamar, how much of that's on Harbaugh, how much of that's on a combination of the three. And you also had Jim Schwartz there, who had this defense at a point and at a state where they were, oh my God, the defense was so great. Myles Garrett has that all-timer season, and you just wonder why you didn't just try to do what it took to keep Jim Schwartz, which was give him the head coaching position. It was the only team that would have taken him as the head coach. But I feel like in this organization in particular, he definitely earned it. And I think the overall coaching staff suffers because of it, because there's a world where you hire Jim Schwartz to be your head coach, and he goes and he gets Mike McDaniel to be the offensive coordinator, and now all of a sudden you got like a top level coaching staff on both sides of the ball. I feel like there could have been a lot more done here, but what does Jim Schwartz do with a Shedeur Sanders long term? I think that was the outlook that this organization took when they brought in Todd Monken. And it's obviously when you hire someone like Todd Monken, who's an offensive-minded guy who has a pedigree and a background of developing a quarterback into a better passer the way he did with Lamar Jackson, that this becomes the quote-unquote correct hire for the long term, more so than just trying to maintain the one strength that you had over the last 2 years, which was on the defensive side. Make sure you guys subscribe to this channel, because as the series continues, I'm going by each team one by one, and I don't want you guys to miss where I ranked your team. So just subscribe to the channel, leave a comment in the comment section for this video, and now what we're going to get moved on to is the offensive side of the ball with the player rankings, and let's talk about Shedeur Sanders. So let's talk about the quarterback room, and it's they're 29th to 30th. Shedeur, to me, is the best of the three, and he should be the starter week one. We've had the Deshaun Watson is going to be quarterback one thing. Deshaun Watson was terrible the last time we saw him play. He has not been good since that last year in Houston. Everything he's shown us since leaving Houston has been absolutely horrible, both on and off the field. To me, he's no different than Dillon Gabriel. I think he's better suited to be the backup just because of the left-handed, right-handed thing, which we talked about in the Dolphins video previously with their quarterback room and the struggles that have going from a left-handed quarterback to a right-handed quarterback can cause for an offensive line and for the receivers and just for the play calling and play designs. So I think for some continuity there, having Shedeur as your one, Watson as your two just makes more sense here. And then Gabriel just becomes your emergency quarterback. But Shedeur, to me, he also falls into the same category you talked about with Malik Willis, where there's these 4 or 5 quarterbacks that are like at the bottom of the league for starters, and you go, okay, when what you're basically trying to put them in order as to your personal opinion, really, as to who you would rather have start for your team this year, and who's more likely to develop, and et cetera, et cetera. And that's why Shedeur is ranked higher than Malik Willis for me. Now, Shedeur Sanders, hell of a marketing team. Hell of a PR team, because this is how he matched up against the rest of the starters in the NFL. Now, these are the guys that received significant starts. It was among 42 eligible quarterbacks from last year is what I used, based upon the amount of snaps and dropbacks that they took. Shedeur is at the bottom, if not the very bottom, in multiple of these categories. His adjusted completion percentage was 38th. His turnover-worthy plays percentage, 42nd. That was second to last. Big time throws, he was 18, so he was pushing the ball down the field. Throwing the ball short, he was 42nd. Intermediate, 38th. Play action, dead last. Kept clean and not blitzed or team rushing 4 or less, second to last, third to last. But he was number 1 in the amount of time to throw. He was 30th in pressure fault, which is basically if a defense had got a pressure, should it have been awarded to the offensive line or should it be awarded to the quarterback? And it was because Shedeur was hanging onto the ball too long, escaping empty pockets and putting himself in peril. But Cleveland Browns' offensive line got blamed for so much, and the organization bought into it so much that they completely revamped the entire offensive line. But when you looked at all the eligible starting quarterbacks, and again, there was like 40-something of them, no one had more time from snap to ball release before pressure than Shedeur Sanders. So, shout out to his PR team for getting that entire offensive line sent to the gulag this past offseason, because holy crap, when I was looking at this stuff, I was like, you gotta be kidding me. We included, oh my god, I couldn't believe how bad he was. Dillon Gabriel performed better in a lot of these categories. Now, why do I give him a higher grade than Dillon Gabriel? Why do I give him a higher grade than Deshaun Watson? It's because I do still feel like there is something skill set wise in Shedeur Sanders that does make him a better option throughout an entire season than someone like Dylan Gabriel, someone like Deshaun Watson, or whoever else, Malik Willis, and from previous videos. Because he does have something. Now, he does have that incredibly high, almost ridiculously delusional confidence, we'll call it. It was perceived to be a significant ego and attitude problem during the draft process, which I think it's a lot of that also. But does that perception of himself, that overinflated perception of himself, lead him down a path where he makes bad decisions? And I think that being 30th in pressure faults, I think, tells the story to some degree. Though he is a rookie, so it's different. The timing is different. What's considered open, what's considered pressured compared to the college level is obviously very different also. So there is adjustments that needs to be made for that. And now with a full offseason as a starter, new offense, new little fresh slate, maybe things change here for Shedeur this upcoming season. I'm just not sure that he is who we perceived him to be in college, which was a guy who had some traits that was at a lesser than program, and if you put him in a better program, that he would play up to that talent level. Which last year with the Browns, the defense really gave that offense an opportunity. He had Kevin Stefanski, who was, as good of an offensive head coach as, you could probably have gotten out of Todd Monken. I think it's a better option. To be honest, I think Stefanski's a better offensive head coach option than Todd Monken at this moment, at least. But maybe you got to change up the philosophy a little bit. Maybe the additions of Denzel Boston and Casey Concepcion, that helps. Maybe revamping the offensive line just a little bit gives Shedeur a little bit of confidence in wiping the slate clean, where he doesn't feel like he's being pressured, even though the numbers and the facts say that he wasn't nearly as pressured as maybe he and the fan base perceived him to be. And you can go back and you can cross-reference the time to throw. You can cross-reference that all you want. But he just didn't play well. Now, I know that you've been watching him make these great throws, but a highlight reel can make anyone look like a megastar. It goes back to that highlight video. There's like a 5-minute highlight video online of Marlon Mack where he looks like he's Barry Sanders. So you can do it with anyone. He's a professional. He's a worthy professional NFL quarterback. So he's going to have these moments, and he's going to have more this year. But how many is he going to have? How consistent is he going to be? And are the lowlights going to be so significant that they undo the highlights? Because the lowlights undid the highlights last year. I don't care what any of the low IQ fan base out there. It's mostly just Madden players and people who don't actually know football that talk about Shedeur being like this. Oh my God, he's like the second coming of what? Tim Couch? Like, this makes it sound like I hate him, but I hate the fans mostly more than anything else. But there's a lot of work that needs to get put into Shedeur Sanders here. There's a lot of work that needs to get put into this quarterback room just in general, and it's going to be a tough task for Todd Monken. It's going to be a real tough task, and we'll know, I think, by about halfway through this season if Shedeur Sanders is the guy or not. If he loses out the starting job, which would shock me, but if he loses out in the summer, then it's safe to say he's done. It's safe to say that he's done. He's not. His name value did more. His name value and his presentation and his marketing did more than what he actually is able to contribute on the field. I think that's a likely scenario for Shedeur. Their weapons room is actually shockingly good. I got them 8 to 13, so they're like a borderline top 10 group, and it's not because they have like this high end like super talent or anything, but what they have is really solid guys across the board. You know, and it starts with the wide receivers, their top 3 wide receivers, and you know, Jerry Jeudy is still considered wide receiver 1 on this team. Last year was just when it rains it pours type scenario for him. He caught less than half of his targets. He was 93rd in drops percentage, which is horrific. He was 82nd in contested catch percentage. Horrific. He wasn't even in the top 100 in deep ball success. He was not even top 70 in the intermediate areas. He wasn't top 60 in the short. He was barely top 50 versus man, barely top 100 versus zone. 60th when playing in the slot for 18.5% of his snaps. Only scored twice, only had 600 yards. He had a lot of just really bad highlights. You know, the one that comes to mind almost immediately is in the game against the Raiders, where, you know, Shedeur hit him, you know, wide open on this big crossing route, and he starts jogging and starts like diddly-daddling around and then gets stripped from behind, turnover. What could have been a 40-yard play for the offense turns into a lost fumble. That quick. And I think there's the other highlight where it's the back shoulder throw to him in the end zone against Chicago. It's perfectly placed. It was a great throw. And he bobbles it into the arms of Jalen Johnson for an interception and a touchback. Those two highlights, I think, really just captured Jerry Jeudy's season last year. Just bad. Just bad luck. No momentum. Nothing of significance in any positive direction. Now, does that mean that he's all of a sudden just not a good wide receiver? No. Is he pretty much what Steve Smith described him as, you know, a jag, just a guy? I think Jerry Jeudy can be a good number 2 wide receiver. Him sitting here and being wide receiver 1 is just, you know, it's just not, I don't think it's sustainable for a great passing game. It does make your overall group better when you have the depth that they have behind him. But they did kind of add, you know, they added Casey Concepcion, who's kind of, you know, going to be the same type of player as he is. But to me, the better player of the 2 drafted is Denzel Boston, who amongst drafted wide receivers or draft eligible wide receivers this past season was number 1 against man. So, and he was 3rd best when lining up in the slot, and he lined up there 18% of the time. So his versatility is kind of what you were looking for in Jerry Jeudy when Denver drafted him and then when Cleveland acquired him in a trade with Denver. And Denzel Boston's going to be really good in contested catches. He's not going to be some guy who drops the ball all that much. You know, under 20 yards down the field, he's going to be a really sure-handed guy. He was 11th in intermediate, 11th in short amongst 2026 eligible wide receivers. Didn't do much with the deep ball, but Washington wasn't a team that was going to push the ball down the field. Now with Shedeur, maybe you're going to push the ball down the field a lot more with Monken in the vertical passing game. So there's real potential here for Denzel Boston to be the number 1 wide receiver on this team, just based on size profile and versatility. He just never really got like a bulk of opportunities at the University of Washington last year. You know, 86 targets, only 56 catches, 750 yards. He did have 10 touchdowns. So with very limited opportunity, he was producing big time. And there's great little moments for him, catching some bubble screens that you wouldn't really expect a guy of his physical stature to be doing. I just think he's a very underrated player, and the fact that he went after Casey Concepcion is kind of weird to me, but Casey Concepcion is the closer player to what you have right now in Jerry Jeudy, which, if Concepcion has a really good summer and produces well early in the year, then I think that kind of spells the end for Jerry Jeudy, because you don't draft a guy like Concepcion who does the same things if that's sort of not the destination anyway. But the one issue with Concepcion that we talked about in our wide receiver rankings pre-draft video is the drops. His drops percentage, he was 136th amongst eligible draftable wide receivers. Now, I don't, if your draft year was 2026 and you're 136th, there's only 200 something players drafted. So, I mean, that is bad. That's bad. That's a bad year of Butterfingers right there for Casey Concepcion. So that thing has to get cleared up. But very similar amount of catches to Denzel Boston. He was down the field a lot more. He really worked the short and the deep areas more so than anything else. Wasn't really a threat in that 10 to 19 yard area. Was 15th against man, 15th against zone, so he was very consistent. 21st in the slot, so he was very consistent against defenses. Didn't really matter what the defense was throwing at him. He was actually very consistent in that sense. So if KC if he just cleans up the drop issues here that he seemingly developed, then at that point I can understand why he might be drafted ahead of someone like Denzel Boston, and why Todd Monken and his staff would look at that and go, we can clean up the catch issues, the drop issues, and then we have all that clay to mold after that. That has a higher upside than what we could get otherwise. I get that. I get that assessment for sure. He's a pretty hard runner, after the catch. Almost half his yards came after the catch. So he's going to be that yards after the catch guy. He's going to be a solid route runner for you. And, another young guy to develop with the rest of your young roster. You got some depth there at the wide receiver. Cedric Tillman has been there a while, hasn't really broken through. Malachi Corley sort of bouncing around now. Jamari Thrash has been there a bit. He's fine. Isaiah Bond had some moments, but just nothing really to get overly excited about. You kind of replaced him with Denzel Boston anyway. But from what they have as the guys that are going to get the most playing time, it's actually pretty good. Now, because it's two rookies, there's a lot of projection here as to what they're going to be at the pro level. But then you have a guy like Harold Fannin, who was a dominant receiving tight end in college, and it translated really well at the next level. Now it's going to be consistent quarterback play. He's going to be able to work himself onto the field a lot more now with David Njoku's gone. So I would look for Harold Fannin to be a huge part of this offense, same way you see someone like Isaiah Likely was in Baltimore. I think look how Todd Monken executed with Isaiah Likely. And then you got Dylan Sampson, who's quietly, the second-year running back, quietly one of the best receiving running backs in the league. We'll never get the praise because, he's not going to be the turnaround, hand the ball off running back that Quinshon Judkins is. But a really great receiving back, man. I think he's going to be a lot of fun in the screen game. Going to be out there, be able to run some routes, better than some of these other guys. And I think that he could have some sneaky moments in games that could be real difference makers for this team. But even when Quinshon Judkins is out there, he's a very serviceable receiving back as well. And they got the rookie tight end Joe Royer, who if they want to go to like a more what they were doing in Baltimore, which was bigger sets, multiple tight ends, Fannin and Roy are on the field at the same time. I think that's going to be advantageous as well. Then you can have a combination of Judy, Boston, and Concepcion as your two receivers. I think that could really present some matchup issues for defenses. Kind of drive them nuts because Harold Fannin's a great receiver. He can almost be like a big slot for you at key moments in games to create those matchup issues when you're looking for a big play, looking to get the defense on their heels a little bit. Going to the running back, actual true running back area here, they're 26th to 27th. Quinshon Judkins had a really good rookie year. Cannot take that away from Quinshon Judkins. But again, kind of like Shedeur, it kind of was blown up a little bit more than maybe it was actually showing in reality. Because he only did get 3.6 yards a carry. Now, this is something you could probably blame on the offensive line. Only getting 3.6 yards a carry. Because out of the 827 yards he had, 735 of it was after contact. So he only ran, of his 221 carries, he only had about 92 yards down the field without being touched at all, that's crazy. That's a crazy amount. He didn't put the ball on the ground. He had 41 missed tackles forced, 50 first downs, 7 touchdowns, 7 explosive runs. So there is something there. You want to see how he does now with a different offensive line group out there, different style of running attack, better running. I would say a better coaching staff for a running back than what he had. But he's got really good burst. He's got pretty good vision. It's just there's just so many good backs in the league also, right? There's just so many good backs that have so many good performances, but it'll be interesting to see what he could do with better offensive line play and like a different style of coaching that's going to be coming his way. Dylan Sampson, we talked about him a bit with the passing game there. He's every bit like a backup running back with the third down running back upside. And then you got Raheem Sanders and Amani Marshall. Raheem Sanders hasn't really gotten the opportunities that I think people expected him to get, at the beginning of his draft process a year ago, where I think many people had him as like a top 2, top 3 running back in the class. Now he's sort of just lost here a little bit, but it'll be interesting to see if he gets opportunities as just like a true running back, not eating into Dylan Sampson's snaps, but being like a good relief for Quinshon Judkins maybe on early downs, and get him going a little bit, get him some more opportunities. But it's not a blow you away running back room. It's very young, very unproven, very up and down, looking for some consistency. Really rounding out a skills groups on this team that are incredibly young and unproven, that have very little NFL experience, have very little professional football tape to go off of and make true assessments on as compared to so many other rosters that we have in the NFL right now. Now let's get to this offensive line that very much was the scapegoat, we'll say, for last year and the struggles that this offense had. Talked about it during the Shedeur part, but if you look at the photos of all these handsome young men, there's only one of them that's wearing a Browns jersey, and that's because they have 4 brand spanking new starters on this offensive line. Todd Monken basically threw the old offensive line in the fire, elevated Tevin Jenkins from a backup, and signed and drafted the rest. Also throw in there Austin Barber and Parker Bracefield, the 2 other rookies they drafted, for the tackle and for the interior offensive line. Kendrick Green is there as a backup, and then DeJuan Jones is your swing tackle. But let's start with the top 10 pick, their first first-round pick, and that's Utah tackle Spencer Fano, who for all intents and purposes was pretty damn good. He was second in pressures allowed, first in quarterback hits allowed, 10th in hurries, didn't allow a sack, was 11th out of all eligible tackles, draftable tackles, 2026 class eligible, in zone blocking, third in gap, 98th in penalties, took some penalties, but when you're taking 822 snaps, that's bound to happen. They ran the ball a lot more than they passed it at Utah last year, at least for when Fano was on the field. So seeing those numbers likely switch will be interesting. And I know you're looking to go 72 and a 72. Those doesn't seem like very high grades considering what he produced in college. You're right, but a big thing is the moving from right tackle to left tackle, which if you talk to some other guys who have made that switch, it's been described as wiping with the other hand. It's like wiping your butt with the other hand. It's like, it feels unnatural, and there's a huge mental hurdle that comes with that. Getting your feet right. You get so used to you play on one side of the field, you get so used to having your feet do certain things. Pushing off of one foot, bucket stepping with another. This is the first step on this play. This is the first step on that play. To make that conversion, what you usually see is you see growing pains, especially from right to left. So I expect Spencer Fano to have those types of issues this year early on. And especially when you have a quarterback who, from last year, has a history of, running out of clean pockets, holding the ball maybe a little too long. That could affect the way a rookie times out what he's doing, and the internal clock that offensive linemen have to have when hanging on to blocks. Because there's the old adage that there's holding on every play. It's just a matter of how long it happens and how significant it is to the play. And offensive linemen kind of get away with that by having that internal clock that they teach themselves back in high school. So Spencer Fano, is going to have a lot of things just sort of thrown at him all at once. First year as a pro, high expectations being a top 10 pick, converting from right tackle to left tackle, completely new system, new city, yada, yada, yada. So there's just a lot to dump on the young man all at once. So I don't expect it to be the smoothest thing, but I think from just an upside perspective, he's got enough there where as the season goes on, we're going to see that development. Then you got next to him, you got Zion Johnson, who kind of he never broke out the way you'd expect a mid-first round pick to break out the way he did with the Chargers, which made getting rid of him a little bit easier for the Chargers. But I think you look at him and you go, it was a slow development, but he did get a little bit better every single year, just not to the heights that you would have wanted for a first-round pick. But now you picked him up, and he's not a first-round pick for you. So you're kind of maybe looking for him to develop just a little bit more and just raise the floor of this overall offensive line, because what you're dealing with here is a pass blocking group that have 8 to 12. So they're basically like fringe top 10 here for pass blocking, but they are like bottom 3, bottom 4, 28th to 31st in run blocking. So you're hoping that you can get some development from Zion Johnson, maybe from a run blocking perspective, to raise that up. And I think just be a solid interior offensive lineman against the pass. But speaking of solid interior offensive lineman against the pass, is their newest center, Elgton Jenkins, coming over from Green Bay. One of the best pass blocking centers, interior offensive linemen you can find. Run blocking, he's always kind of left a little bit to be desired. But the thing about Elgton Jenkins is that when he was in Green Bay, he never really got to settle in at any position. He played right tackle, he played left tackle, he played right guard, he played left guard, he played center. And constantly changing positions does affect your ability to truly reach your ceiling. Now, should he have been a center all along coming out of Mississippi State? I mean, maybe. I think if they had committed to him at center earlier and not just had him being like this swing offensive lineman every time someone got hurt or every time there was a roster issue, they just flung him into it. But he still ended up becoming one hell of a player. And for Cleveland to come in and say, you're going to be our center, that's where we're committing you to. You and Shedeur are going to be a quarterback center combination. Now, that's why you go and get Parker Bracefield, to be quite honest, because if Zion Johnson or Tevin Jenkins don't work out, you can kick Jenkins to guard, and then Bracefield steps in at center. I think that's sort of the motive that they have right now. But man, Jenkins, he's just so athletic. He's the versatility. Being able to go from left to right is something that obviously always helps a center, because a center does have to do both all the time. You can be a right guard and not go left all that often and just focus everything from left to right, or be on the left side and focus everything's right to left. But the versatility that Elgton Jenkins brings to this offensive line does help with some continuity. I think from a leadership and a football IQ perspective as well, having a guy like Elgton Jenkins be able to assist with the pre-snap calls for the offensive line does take a lot of the pressure off of Shedeur Sanders and takes a lot of the pre-snap jitters away, the pre-snap pressure away, the pre-snap thinking away, where Shedeur can focus more on just execution, more so than shifts and identifies and all that kind of stuff that all kind of fall on him, the way you'd see from top-end quarterbacks or teams that just don't have like that high IQ top-level center. Having Elgton Jenkins, who understands pass protection, is a great pass protector, and has been in the league for as long as he has, that's a huge underrated boost for what Shedeur Sanders can start to learn and develop throughout the season and throughout the offseason from. It almost becomes like an extra coach for Shedeur, definitely a coach on the field. Then you move to his right, you got Tevin Jenkins, who was brought in as a backup last year, sort of like the sixth offensive lineman. Has been a tackle in Chicago, been a guard in Chicago. I thought he was a really good guard who sort of ended up in this weird situation behind Joel Bitonio and Wyatt Teller last year. But I like that he's getting this opportunity. I think he's a pretty solid all-around offensive lineman. And then another new addition was trading for Titus Howard from Houston, who Titus Howard kind of had a breakout season a little bit. The last couple of years, he's been a solid pass blocker from the right side. Like a true number 2 tackle. He didn't give up any sacks, didn't give up a lot of hits. Took some penalties, 30-second in pressures, so that's like bottom end of number 1. Sort of like a middle of the pack tackle. Because there are 64 starting tackles in the league, so being 32nd, he's in the middle of the pack. Quarterback hurries, he was towards the bottom end of the low-end starter. CJ Stroud had to do some work, but Shedeur's got the ability to escape pockets. But having Titus Howard and Spencer Fano as your tackles, I think that creates at least a good foundation. And then having Elgton Jenkins, a great pass protector, right up down the middle, I think that's another. It creates a really easy environment here where you can bounce off of some double teams a little bit more. Depending on the matchups, you can trust to have Titus Howard sort of live on an island while you help the rookie out or help out one of the guards with Elgton Jenkins. So, and Howard has versatility as well, played guard, played tackle for Houston. I do like the offensive line here. I think the run blocking is going to really suffer. So they need to get some development there from Zion Johnson and from Spencer Fano, and Elton Jenkins just needs to be a better run blocker as well. At this stage in his career, he needs to step up. But having Titus Howard be your worst run blocker, and you just don't have like a great run blocker. So it's going to be a lot of scheme that's probably going to have to disguise that. But you really don't have much to worry about from a pass blocking perspective anymore, even though, like we said during the Shedeur part, it didn't seem like there was actually all that much to worry about from the offensive line anyway. But hey, allegedly he was running for his life, so he shouldn't have to be doing that this year. That's for sure. Overall, this somehow turned out to be my lowest ranked offense. It wasn't by much. But it ended up being right there at the end. 29th pass offense, 30th rush offense with Tier 4 offensive coaching. We'll see what Todd Monken offers here. We'll see if Todd Monken can boost this up and get them to another level. Because if he can get up into that Tier 3 level coaching this year from an offensive perspective, him and Travis Switzer, then it could bump this offense, out of the bottom 5 at least. And again, developing Shedeur Sanders, figuring out the rushing aspect of the offensive line, those are significant, and developing the really young skill positions that you have in the wide receiver room and the running back room as well to help out with the development of Shedeur. Now let's get to the real strength of this team, the defensive side of the ball. Now, sans Jim Schwartz like we talked about earlier, but they still have a really solid talent roster. So overall, it's the 11th to 16th pass rush and 9th to 11th in terms of run defense. So it's a very good defensive line. And it's led by the best of the best, which is Myles Garrett, the defending defensive player of the year, NFL single-season sack record holder with 23. He was 4th in pressures, 2nd in pass rush win percentage, 11th in quarterback hits, 8th in hurries. He was 4th in forced fumbles, 11th best missed tackle percentage. So he was as sure as anything in both aspects of the game, across all 3 downs, across all situations. That's why he gets the 98 pass rush and the 92 run defense. The guy was just an absolute beast there outside the tackles. Great pursuit angles, great strength, great speed, great hands, great get, all of it. Every single aspect of being an edge rusher in the NFL, an edge player in the NFL, he does great. The stops percentage, he was 75th, but that's because they had to run away. They ran away from him all the time. Batted balls, he was 25th, which, I mean, he was getting to the quarterback. He was getting the sacks and getting the hits, getting the hurries. So there wasn't a whole lot of space for him to be batting down balls at the line of scrimmage because he was rarely ever there. He was usually on the quarterback's butt somehow at some point. And now, how do you follow it up? How do you follow up the single greatest defensive end performance in league history? I don't know. There's nowhere to go but down. You lost Jim Schwartz. There's nowhere to go but down. So it's going to be interesting to see how far down he goes, right? Because it's not going to be another 23-sack season. Will it be a 20-sack season? Will it be a 19-sack season? And are you going to sit there and you're going to be like, oh, we only got 19 sacks? Absolutely not. Is he going to be 5th or 6th in pressures this year? Is he going to be 3rd or 5th? 3rd to 5th in win percentage? Is he going to be, 15th or 16th in hurt? Or has he peaked and now it's just all downhill from here altogether? It's somehow become one of the more interesting stories that we can talk about with the Browns is going to be, what does Myles Garrett do to follow up this season? But he does it with a lot of really great players around him. Now, right now, Alex Wright is listed on the depth chart as the starting defensive end on the opposite side, which I really don't understand. I don't get it. And the reason why I don't get it is because I think Isaiah McGuire is just better than him in a lot of ways. Isaiah McGuire is a good number 2 pass rusher. A great compliment for Myles Garrett off the other side because he can hold his own. He's not some megastar or anything like that, but 76th grade is pretty damn good. And he's like an elite run defender. So like between him and Myles Garrett holding off, the two defensive end positions in the run game, you ain't getting outside. You're going nowhere. You're getting funneled right back into those defensive tackles and linebackers 99 times out of 100. But there's clearly, they like Alex Wright, coming out of, I think it was UAB. He was always a developmental project, kind of like what we see with Austin Booker over in Chicago. He's this guy who came out and they were like, okay, we're going to draft him earlier than maybe he should come out, but we're going to develop him. And it's been a slower development for him. Had his moments. But I think there's going to be some other rookies that they picked up as restricted free agents, as undrafted free agents, that are going to be breathing down his neck. Logan Fano and Tyreek Sapp. They're solid. They're pretty solid. They're solid little developmental pieces here. And Wright may be better overall than both of them, but it's not by much. So we'll see which one of those guys makes the team, if any of them, and how that affects the amount of snaps that Alex Wright is going to get this upcoming season. But one place, the interior defensive line is also a really good compliment, at least from a starter's perspective. And they have last year's first-round pick Mason Graham, who quietly had a really good season. He wasn't blowing people away by any means, but he'd have some games where he wasn't anybody, but then there'd be other games where he played pretty well. He was 22nd in pressures amongst interior defensive linemen. He was 14th in quarterback hurries, 26th in batted balls, 23rd in stop percentage. So he had some good little features in his game. He barely stayed inside the top 60 missed tackle percentage. So, get a little more sure-handed on the wrap-ups. Quarterback hits, he was in the top 40. Wins percentage, you'll like to see him do better there. And finishing off those pressures, being 22nd in pressures, but 83rd in sacks. You got to get up that conversion rate, that pressure to sack conversion rate, which that comes. That comes with time. That comes with, he's helped, but him getting that many pressures is also helping out Myles Garrett. It's helping out Alex Wright. It's helping out Malik Collins. Get their statistical, the sexiness of the stat sheet for them. But I think he was just incredibly underrated because the actual stats didn't really pop off the sheet for everybody. So it was more like you just kind of had to be watching him snap to snap and see that, oh, he's actually kind of making an impact here. It's just he's getting none of the glory for it. So I would really like to see that continue for Mason Graham this upcoming season. And he's got a great compliment in Malik Collins, who, has some injury concerns that look all good at this point. Collins not a great run defender, but from a pass rush perspective, you'll love to have a guy like him as your interior. Now, what they had last year that they don't have this year is interior defensive line depth. Because right now you got Kalia Davis and Mike Hall, and that's kind of it. So Mike Hall maybe is more of your, we need a pass rushing interior guy, let's put in Mike Hall. And then if you need more of a run defending type, then maybe it's Kalia Davis at that point. So, but neither one is like this, is great at, or particularly I would say good at either one of those aspects. They are very much like backups, a snap here or there, get the guy a breather type if maybe the offense has one too many 3-and-outs and the opposing team puts together a couple of sustained drives. Then get the big boys out. But I think we want to see a lot of Mason Graham and Malik Collins and not so much out of Kalia Davis and Mike Hall. Now going to the linebackers here, which is kind of Mike Ruttenberg's wheelhouse, the pass game and the linebackers. And they have a pretty decent linebacker group. I got them 23rd to 26th in coverage, 27th to 28th in run defense. Now, man, I understand that this Browns fans just looked at this and they went, what the hell are you talking about? Particularly with Carson Schwessinger, the defending defensive rookie of the year, who was a good rookie. He was a good rookie. He's got a 75 run defense grade, which when you're assessing a linebacker from an overall perspective, you would prefer them to have a better run defense grade than a coverage grade. Because in coverage, you're kind of just sitting there playing zone for the most part. Maybe you're covering, maybe there's a blitz and you're in man coverage with a running back or a tight end, God forbid. Which he was fine in the moments where he had to do man coverage. He was 15th. So that's mid number one linebacker right there. But in zone, where you spend most of your time in coverage as a linebacker, he was barely in the top 50. So, how do you assess him then as a covered linebacker? I feel like you got to kind of lean to where they're going to be 99% of the time in coverage, and that's in zone. And some sort of spy or whatever there in the middle of the field. And he's kind of like this really low end number one, mid number two linebacker in that sense. He was 55th in pass breakup, so when the ball is getting near him, he's kind of just not doing anything with it. 80th in completion percentage allowed. When he gets targeted, it's over. 46 targets, 41 completions. Now, from a stops percentage, he was 12th. So that's really good there on third down. 106 tackles, 38 assists, really good pursuit angles, really good athlete, really smart in, working those angles. You saw him have some really good moment or two against Lamar Jackson in pursuit of him. Being aggressive at ball identification, but, still a rookie in that sense, still very much a rookie, so still needs time to develop that aspect of his game a little bit. But it's all looking up. It's all looking positive. The second year for Schwessinger, what he can be at the end of this season, if he continues the growth that I think should be expected of him, then he'll get into that top 20, top 15 linebacker in the league conversation. Or, is the second year a significant jump? It'll be interesting to see how that works out with Jim Schwartz gone and Mike Ruttenberg in. You got to keep in mind that so much of what was great about the performances of these Browns players in last year's defense, or some of the guys that have been there for before that, was because of a significantly exceptional defensive coordinator in Jim Schwartz. So now you go from that to a first-time defensive coordinator who's kind of used to just being part of middle-of-the-pack defensive performances at best. It does change things. Now Quincy Williams comes in to sort of give you a boost there, but losing JOK for another year, the likelihood of him playing ever again is just super low, and it's just unfortunate you don't get to see the Schwessinger-JOK linebacking pairing. And they drafted Justin Jefferson, who from a cover perspective can fill in. I just don't like him from a run defense. Winston Reed and Nathaniel Watson are kind of just bleh. They're just who cares? Very much linebacker 4 and 5 on this team. I stand by that they should have, if they should have done the stick and pick and just taken Sonny Styles. And then you had enough draft capital if you could moved up and still gotten your tackle, whichever tackle you would have liked. But I think if Sonny Styles and Carson Schwessinger being the pairing of linebackers here, we have a whole different conversation about what this linebacker group looks like. And Quincy Williams is just a little bit past his prime, really been on the downturn ever since he peaked with the Jets. And plummeting pretty fast. So we'll see if you can pull up the nose of that plane for Quincy Williams. he's still fine, from a coverage balance, still a balanced linebacker. But I do think that Carson Schwarzenegger, as a solo act, it's going to be much harder for him this season to put up the type of performance that he did last year, which is weird to say for a guy who's coming off a rookie season. But from just a scheme perspective, from a coaching perspective, it's much more of an uphill battle than what he had last year. Now with the defensive backs, I got them 13th to 15th in coverage, so the upper half of the league for sure. And they get a B grade in run support. So some really good tacklers, really aggressive players. And it starts on the outside. There are two outside corner positions with veteran Denzel Ward, who kind of had a down year last year, we'll call it. Didn't really rank all that well against the rest of the league. Was targeted 54 times, gave up 32 catches. That was 51st in completion percentage. He was 35th in forced incompletions. He allowed 3 touchdowns, only had 1 interception. He was 53rd in passer rating allowed amongst eligible corners. Didn't take a lot of penalties. Probably should have taken a couple more based upon how this turned out. Maybe it would have been looked a little bit more effective. But took over, 720 something snaps, and it just didn't look like himself out there, and with how great that pass rush was, I feel like I expected more of Denzel Ward. I expected him to just pop off the page and being a guy who at one point in the league was considered like a top 5 corner, has sort of come back down, and now he's like this more low end, middling number 1 than like a true top level corner. Now I know he's like 8 years into his career, but like this should be where he should be peaking right now, right? Like year 7, year 8, that should be when you're hitting your top stride. And it seems like he kind of hit that stride in like year 3, year 4, got his second contract, and it just kind of, had the moments, but hasn't been able to sustain them. But opposite of him, I really like the pairing with Tyson Campbell, who they traded Greg Newsome to Jacksonville to get Tyson Campbell. I think it was a straight player swap. I don't think any draft picks were involved. But he was just a little bit better last year than Denzel Ward. 29th man coverage, 30th zone. Took way more snaps than Ward did. Took almost 900 snaps. Was 13th in completion percentage allowed. He did allow 6 touchdowns, but he had 8 pass breakups, 59th in passer rating allowed. So it was Tyson Campbell, and I see Tyson Campbell and Denzel Ward. They sort of fall now into the same category, the same class of cornerback, which I think still makes a good pairing. I think it's those situations where now you don't need to follow around a guy. If you get favorable matchups, you can just play one guy to one side, one guy to the other, and then you have a lot of balance across the entire defense in that sense. Then you get Miles Harden, who will get some slot work. Miles Bryant, Dom Jones, and D'Angelo Ross are there, as well as rotational guys. Those 4 guys are all competing for snaps. But what they did in the draft, getting the ultimate my guy from Toledo, Emmanuel McNeil-Warren, I think this eats into the Miles Harden snap count, because Emmanuel McNeil-Warren should have been a first-round pick. From a coverage perspective, he was phenomenal. Targeted 14 times, 6 receptions allowed last year at Toledo, 6th amongst draftable safeties. In completion percentage, 5th in forced incompletions, 26th in passer rating allowed. He only allowed 116 yards and a touchdown. He had 2 interceptions, 4 pass breakups. Didn't do a lot of slot work, but played that box safety role to perfection for Toledo. Now, you draft him, and this guy, he becomes your like Kyle Hamilton player, almost. Like a Kyle Hamilton, Derwin James, like just that type of safety that you can really just put anywhere out there. And he's going to be able to, if you need to match him up against a running back or a tight end, he can do that. If he needs to come down, play the slot, he can do that. He's got the ability, and he does play much better in zone. He's got really good instincts there, and it's the run defending. It's the physicality that he plays with, where he just is a magnet to the ball carrier, and he doesn't miss tackles all that often. He is just a solid all-around player. Should have been a first-round pick. And maybe on this team, it feels like sort of a luxury pick because they have a good safety room, one of the better ones in the league. But he is very different than the other safeties that they have, which to me is why Miles Harden and all these other traditional corners are kind of going to be at a loss here, because now Grant Delpit, who did a lot of slot work, is going to just really take over that role, I think, fully. Where he'll drop down, he'll be more of a primary slot player this upcoming season to get those 5 guys all on the field at the same time. Because then you got Ronnie Hickman, who is your true free safety, who had 706 of his snaps last year as a free safety, only 226 in the box, 71 in the slot. He was 11th in the league in passer rating allowed, 13th in forced incompletions, 9th in completion percentage allowed. He had 62 tackles, 30 assist tackles. Like, as an all-around safety, we got to start talking about Ronnie Hickman being one of the better safeties in the entire league. Like, I think because, he's in Cleveland and Myles Garrett is there and all the stuff with Shedeur Sanders, and it just kind of being Cleveland also, where people don't want to talk about it, that he sort of gets lost in the shuffle here. But he wasn't a highly drafted player, and ever since day one that he's been on this team, he has been an absolute animal, an absolute beast, and a great, great safety. Another great performance this year. He has to be put in the conversation with Hamilton and James and Jesse Bates. He has to start entering those conversations because he's just been too good and too consistent ever since coming into the league, and he gets better as well. The lights aren't too bright for him no matter what team he's playing against. He's aggressive at the point of attack. He isn't afraid to stick his nose in the run game. He is a true great safety in the league, which really rounds out this entire defensive back room, where you put Denzel Ward, Tyson Campbell, Emmanuel McNeil-Warren, Ronnie Hickman, and Grant Delpit all on the field at the same time. If they end up invoking that strategy, you get a little bit slower. You end up being one of the slower groups in the league, just sort of naturally that way. So maybe you become more susceptible to speed as a secondary group. So you get those faster wide receiver rooms that you could play against. You could find yourself in some trouble. But I think from an overall perspective, if you get into these games where it becomes about hard-nosed football, tough running, tough defense, those later winter games that they'll find themselves in at home, in Pittsburgh, in Baltimore, in Cincinnati, they'll be a much bigger threat in those games than people will give them credit for, I think, early on in the year. And it'll be because of this group adding into what they have with the front seven. It'll be 11 aggressive, hard-hitting players, old-school style football. It's just kind of up to Mike Ruttenberg to use them in that way and to understand when to invoke that. Because like I said, you can't just invoke it all game, every game against every team. And it is that lack of faith in the coaching staff on the defensive side that kind of drags down this defense's overall ranking. Because they do have, from just a pure roster skill perspective, 14th in pass defense, 14th in rush defense. But without that boost from their defensive coaching staff, it does put them at 24th. So it kind of has them just below some of these teams that have very similar talent rosters, but have better coaching. So we'll see what Mike Ruttenberg is able to produce here as somebody relatively completely actually unproven as a defensive coordinator with a completely unproven head coach to guide him along the way. Now going through the strength of schedule here, and it looks like Cleveland actually has the easiest strength of schedule with a .429 strength of schedule. Vegas' over-under has some 6.5 wins. I have them as the under. And just going through some of these teams, starting on the road in Jacksonville and on the road in Tampa, that's a tough start. That's a tough start. Then you get Carolina, Pittsburgh at home. You get these home games and, you gotta be looking and feeling kind of okay. Don't really know what Pittsburgh's going to be doing at week 4. You are at home. Carolina, same sort of thing. Carolina very much overachieved last year. Pittsburgh, new coach Mike McCarthy. Do they have the same high floor as a team and a culture that they had just a year ago? So that'll be interesting to see. Then you go to play the Jets on the road. I think your defense matches up really well against their offense at the very least. So if you get some good defensive plays early on in the game, you could pull out that one. I don't think they'll beat Baltimore either time, but they get 3 road games in a row. They go to Tennessee, which Tennessee doesn't have the strongest roster. They have to go to Pittsburgh, which I don't know that they can do that. That's going to be tough after being on the road, and then going from road, and then being on the road again against the Saints. That'll be a much tougher outing for them as well. Though I think that that would be a game they could pull off there as well. Then they host Houston before the bye week. A nice bye week late in the year. I think that's advantageous. You come out of the bye though, and you start with hosting Vegas. You get 3 home games in a row. So you're spending 5 weeks at home consecutively. That's a month, and that's over a month straight that the Browns players get to stay in Cleveland, stay at their own facility, not have to worry about getting on planes and all that crap. So that could work in their favor, which is why I think they can come out of that bye week really strong against the Raiders. And then even the next week against Cincinnati, who I think we're all hoping can finally play up to the potential of their roster. Can they get coached well, I guess is the question. We'll get to that team eventually in this series. But then it's just a tough road from that point forward. Against Atlanta, I still think Atlanta is, from a defensive perspective and just from all the weapons they have, even if it's Penix or if it's Tua, I still think that they're still, tiers ahead of what Cleveland has right now. Then they got to go on the road to the Giants and to the Ravens, which that sucks late in the year. That's going to suck. At the very least, you got to expect the Giants at that point to have had it all put together at that point, with Malik Neighbors coming back fully healthy by then. Baltimore, again, a tough out. Got to play the Colts. I think the Colts are going to be a really solid team. They got a really solid roster. They can keep the quarterback position consistent. Then they're a tough out. And then ending the season in Cincinnati, assuming Cincinnati is going to be in a position where they're going to be playing for something here, that game's going to matter to them, and it won't matter so much to Cleveland. But my projection here is they got 1, 2, 3. I got 4 wins. I got about a 4-win total here for them, which maybe they steal another one at some point and it gets to 5, but I don't think they're getting 7 wins to get over that 6.5. I think that's too big of a number for them at this stage. And it's certainly definitely more of a team under the mentality as an organization to focus on player development and focus on just stringing together good decision making, good game planning and execution, and getting better every single week than being truly like competitive playoff team. And that's reflective in their ranking of being 31st with the 28th ranked head coach. Dead last in offense, but not by much. So don't crucify me, guys. They're not, there's like 4 or 5 teams right there that are real tight. And then 24th in defense, where they got the talent. I'm just not sure they got the coaching. And that wraps up my number 31 team, the Cleveland Browns, in my 2026 NFL Deep Dive series. Thank you guys for watching. Drop a comment in the comment section below. Where do you agree? Where do you disagree? What are your thoughts on Shedeur Sanders and the Todd Monken hire in particular? Do you think that they're a match made in heaven, or is this just another team that is a potential landing spot for ya boy Arch Manning in the 2027 NFL Draft? You guys let me know, and I will see you guys with the next video next time.